In this video, we're going to explore some ways of painting bone. I've got a Reaper miniature here. I thought this skeletal cavalry figure might be really a good example, because just a regular human skeleton, it wouldn't quite show as many different things as this jaw, this head, the larger ribs, all the complexity and the different bones of the leg. This could really let me show you how to do some subtle things where it's not just a matter of bleach bone and brown wash. There's a little more to it than that. I think you'll see there's no bleach bone out here. So here's our raw miniature. I even have a few extra little skulls from Secret Weapon that I added. You can see some of the colors out here. In the dark section, we've got some of this olive drab here, leather brown, some khaki, some of this Privateer Press rucksack tan, to make sure that we have some nice warm colors, some ice yellow, ivory. Really want to avoid, and I try to do this all the time, is avoid pure white colors, because one thing they'll do is make your stuff seem chalky. It starts to look a little out of place. There are some miniatures where it works. Say if you want just a pure white color, but in the case of this bone, especially here, it's supposed to look kind of aged and weathered, and we don't want a lot of white there. I've got I've got a few colors that I consider my lights. We've got this yellow here, got kind of a red here, sort of a blue, and that kind of follows the color wheel, red, yellow, blue, the three basic colors. But here they are sort of in highlight form. And this brown marin here, or brown rose, that's going to play out in a few areas on this, especially maybe on some of the leather work. And then this is kind of a generic, sort of a snot green color that I threw out for the little bit of horse blanket and for the shield. Now, some other things you'll see me use, aside from these colors, going to be something from Reaper. This is called Brown Liner. This is an interesting paint. It's very watery, not like say a wash, but it's very intense dark color. So this is really fantastic for getting some of the darks in the bone. Got a few other things out here. Have a glaze medium. What this does is it'll keep your paint wetter for longer, especially on the miniature itself. So that way you can maybe do a little wet blending. And we've got some of this flow improver. This is made by Reaper. And what this will do is, where water, if you thin down your paints with water, you might get some water marks, those crazy little jagged edges. It's less likely to happen with the flow improver. You get the same effective thinning down the paints, but not have that issue of bleeding and that jagged wash edge. So we've set out the colors. So let's talk about the brushes and the palette. I've got my brushes divided into three main groups. This first group are called filbert brushes. You can see I've got a few different sizes. This is about the biggest one here. Go all the way down to a 4. So there's a 6. You can go down to 2. I think I have a few of those. And what I like about these is that got this big broad surface like a flat brush. See around here it's kind of tapered. So it can do some nice soft blending effects. And as I turn this on its edge, look at that very sharp edge. So you kind of get a little bit of everything. Get this broad coverage, nice round feathered edge there, but yet chisel edge here. This next set of brushes, these are actually some craft brushes, number 8 rounds, and they're in a few. Some of these are a little more worn than others. This one's in a little bit newer condition. You can see it's got a pretty nice point on it. Got a whole set of them here, whole package of 10, and you can see not terribly expensive. I use these really for a huge amount of work, because this brush that's a little more distressed, well, that's the kind of brush you use to say do your first layers of color on a base, where you're just kind of jamming the paint in there. Why ruin a really good brush when you could just take a 50-cent brush that you've used a lot and stick your color on that way? A brush that's still in this state with a decent point, well, you can still get a fair amount of detail with this brush. The last kind of category of brushes, these are liner brushes right here. Got a few of these American painters, kind of like this brand. It's a very reasonable price, but yet you've got a brush that's going to hold an edge but also hold a lot of water and pigment. This is kind of the lower end of the price scale. In the middle we've got, it's a Winsor Newton, but this is it's kind of halfway in between the American Painter and these Kolinsky Sables right here. These are the Series 7. So by having some of these other brushes here, we really extend the life of these, because we're just using these for whatever our finest detail is. So again, we have the brushes that do the bulk work, and then the brushes for the fine work. So now that we've talked about our paint and our brushes, one last little thing I want to talk about here, and that's this palette. See, it's a disposable palette. I'm going to bring out the package. Here, it's 40 sheets, 9 by 12, and the beauty of this is that there's, when your palette's used up, cleanup consists of just tearing this off and tossing it out. No porcelain watercolor trays to wash out or anything like that. So, with that, I think it's time that we get to our miniature. Okay, let's get down to business here. I've set the figure on top of a empty paint container. It's actually got a piece of sheet metal there. I've got a magnet here to kind of keep it secured to this, but it's a little heavier miniature, so I've used some blue tack to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Normally, I use a dowel rod with a metal pin for my miniatures, but here there just wasn't enough to put the pin through. I had to grab something that was a little bit thinner, and I've got the blue tack again. So it's gonna let me do his work on him, and the same for our horse. So I got some colors out on the palette here, kind of our darker range, lighter range. We're going to really focus here more, not so much here, because that's what all of our darker shading and glazing is for. So what we're going to do is set some few colors out here. This is kind of a palette within a palette concept. So what I'm doing, see, I'm almost pre-mixing Okay, so we have this whole global palette. Here's the local palette, a little family of colors right here. And what I want to do is create a few of these kind of color families like this. You can see just how this tan, this khaki color right here, it just changes depending on what you mix it with. Mix it with a little of this verdigris here. So what I want to do is I want to have enough of these subtle colors here to put down. Now, again, these first layers, it's just about covering the whole miniature. That's all this is about. Unlike other methods, the whole principle behind this, see, this is why we've got this kind of distressed brush, because I can take it, just jam it down in here to make sure the paint gets where it needs to go. Let's even take some of this. You can see already, as I'm working around this, this is already starting to, we're starting to feel out where we want some of our different colors to go. I'm not going to get too bright. And any of this. The idea is, again, to just cover as much of this as we can. So I just know in this section I want it to be more this warm tan. I might even take some of this green, throw it in here, and put some down here, because since we've got some greenish color in the armor, green here, why not to be just on that the saddle blanket? It has to be other places too. So I'll just throw some of that out there, just like that. We'll be sure to include some of this brown rose on that side of the face. See where I'm holding the brush down on the end? It's a typical thing, especially in these early stages. I don't want to get in. It's not about details yet. This is just about coverage, just covering. See, we've got parts here of the miniature that need paint. Just more important to get paint on those. So again, mostly already covered with some kind of a color. Something's out there. And the reason I work on the entire miniature all at once, another part of it is, well, if you do all this detail somewhere, say here, but then you got to get at the saddle blanket or other places, well, now you run the risk of damaging that area. You might hit it with paint, or any number of bad things can happen. So if I figure if I have all of this kind of work finished, where I've just covered it with paint and even done a little bit of basic shading, well, that should insulate me from those type of disasters. I learned that the hard way. I'm going to introduce a little more of this verdigris here. See, I'm already starting to maybe play around with some of the lights and darks. That's the whole idea of this shaded base coat principle. Now I mentioned that those filbert brushes. So let's bring out some of those. And let's try kind of a middle shape here. Not too big, not too small. What we'll do, even though this is still relatively wet, and hold the brush further down on the end. Let's get some of this pale flesh to that mix, and we're going to just pick out some areas that we know are going to be lighter. We know we want this end to be lighter, but I've gone back into my green. See what I've done here. And work my way around. Now at a certain point, I'll have to set this aside and let the paint dry a little bit. So you can see I'm not doing dry brushing. You can see there's still a healthy amount of pigment on this brush. I call it damp brushing. It's more about taking the brush, holding out its side, and scraping the pigment on. Same thing here with this verdigris. So all I want to do is just set out these colors. Establish it's called a value pattern. It's just where your lights and darks are going to be. What areas are going to be in shadow, what areas will be in light. Let's set the horse aside for a little bit. Let that dry. Because we've got somebody else to worry about here. It's this guy. So what I'm going to do is actually pull him off of there for now. So I can get at some of these interior spaces. So just like I did for the horse, right away, get as much coverage as I can. That just involves nothing terribly fancy. What I was doing is just bracing him against the palette, because I'm holding it against the shaft of this lance. These legs tend to be a little bit fragile, so I'm trying to offer a little bit of support as I do this. So I actually stood him on the palette. This is a pretty aggressive motion that I'm using here. The whole idea is, again, just to make sure that I've got some paint everywhere. Because you can see how I've got these colors out here. This way I can compare, just how dark is this. If it's next to this white, it looks really bright, but if it's next to that, it's not so bright. It's also the reason why the miniature was primed in this neutral gray. I tend to go that route. And I almost always use brush on primer, by the way. I found that it's way more effective. I don't have to worry about if it's cold outside, hot outside, if it's raining, snowing, doesn't matter, if it's sunny. And I tend to just waste less of it because it's not just going up into the atmosphere, it's actually all going onto the miniature. It also lets me control just exactly what kind of a primer I want on the miniature. If I did a white, I can see This green looks really, really dark against white. It's not really all that light, especially when you compare it to, let's say if we had primed this black. All of a sudden this green is going to look very light. So if I go in neutral gray, we don't make the dark colors look too light. We don't make the light colors look... It's a better way to go, at least for me. I guess I picked that up from my days as a artist with pastels and watercolors. Okay, so him, I do the same sort of thing. Start putting some lighter colors on them. I want to make sure I'm always varying the temperature. So that's more blue, more red, and we've got that yellow, and we're always gonna move around into the next. And that's the other thing about aged stained bone, that it tends not to be just the same color. And I'm just kind of twirling this around really quickly. It's probably hard to see. That's okay. I get to see more once this initial coat is done. Because we're going to work a lot with glazes to tint this. I'm just going to work a little bit around the outside of the shield here. I want to indicate that this is going to be green. Let's do a little bit on this lance here. Now he is going to have to dry before I can even put him back on pencil. This is dried a little bit, so that means we can go back in with our filbert and start to do some more lights. I've grabbed some of the yellow. You can see here some of this gets very yellow. Might even grab some actual yellow to do some of but those are our brightest accents. What I'm going to do is kind of brace my hand here. And again, it's not dry brushing. I'm just trying to pick the surface. I want to keep some of these, see all these little tiny bones that they've sculpted in here? I want to keep that. Don't want to lose that. So working along that edge. I know I want this to be darker. Let's get some of this brown rose. That's enough there. Now I'm into that pale flesh color. Picking out again. So I'm holding the brush down on the end here. Using this round, how round that is, I'm going to use that to my favor. That's what's allowing me to actually blend this a little bit. Is that soft, rounded edge. And these are very, very light brush strokes here. At this stage, I'm not really washing the brush a whole lot. See these skulls on the ground, same thing. Continue this along the tailbone here. Now, it's possible that when you do a lot of your subsequent glazes, washes, there's all different kinds of terms for those, that maybe you lose some of your highlights. Well, that's fine. You can always put those back in. I think you can start to see some of the lights and shadows emerge on this. Even though our shadows are nowhere near as dark as they're eventually going to be. So we've got this hip and pelvis area that we're going to bring out here. Now let's go with some of that yellow. Back to the rib cage, back to knee joint. You can see I'm twirling this around, not getting bogged down, just on the face. I'm not just going to get myself bogged down here. I'm going to do a little bit here and stop. Move on. A little bit here. Move on. The whole idea is just keep moving. It's even more important on a figure like this, where there's kind of a lot going on. All these little smaller bones. Again, nowhere near white, but nowhere near black either. Because, remember, as strange as it sounds, we're considering this as a base coat. That's all it is. It's not just a flat, that the difference is we're just not throwing down a flat color. So I've just done some of the verdigris, that kind of light bluish gray. And we're picking out, this is a little bit of non-metallic metal, I know. Didn't want to do too much. Just enough. Now the saddle, bring some of that leather brown back out here. And do a little bit on the saddle, bring out some of the lights here, back to that khaki. And I'm going to leave this for now, and I'm going to go back to our, let's put you over there. So we have our skeleton here. Let's see if we can get him back on this little pedestal, like so. I'm going to do the same thing to him. There's just not quite as much of him as there is on the horse. So I picked out this elbow joint. That's going to be dark. That's going to let this elbow joint, let's do even a little more. So right away, we're setting this up to stand out on his skull. Same thing. Let's pick out some of that along the spine. I want some more verdigris out here. We focused a lot on the yellows and the pinks on this guy. I want to make sure we still have some of this blue. So I'm going to wipe off some of the excess. See again, plenty of pigment on the brush. It's just how heavy the stroke is. So get that shoulder a little bit highlighted, the ribs. Sneak the brush in there. Little work on the shield, because we know we want this to be lighted down here. It's a little non-metallic trick. It's a little subtle thing. Top surface lighter and some reflected light there. I'm just going to throw some paint on the end of the lance here. We're going to make this kind of rusty and old. Again, I'm using the palette to brace. Top edge, lighter. I'll just leave that go for now. Same thing on his, some of the leg bones. See if I can get some yellow here. What's nice, well, when you've got something skeletal like this, most likely the equipment he's going to have is going to be pretty, not exactly in the most pristine of condition. So you can see what we're trying to do. So we're trying to set up some of our lights here, see how bright that was. So what I'm going to do is dry off some of this, and then we'll do a tiny bit more of our shaded base coat, and then we're going to start to talk about glazing and shading and all that other stuff. So let's just let this, let both the horse and the rider dry a little bit, and then we'll move on. Now that he's dried a little bit, I'm going to throw in some of the greens. So I've got some of the olive drab, mixing that in with the green. And let's start to see where this, what's left of his saddle blanket's going to go. There's not very much of it. There's this little bit here. And that's about all there is. Same thing here with his shield. I chose the green because I thought it would be a nice accent to all of the kind of the yellows and tans and pinks and browns of the skeleton and the skeletal horse. I can throw out a little more of the green. Use a little bit of the verdigris now to lighten that. Throw a little bit on that shield. Leave him be. And now on the horse. Again, with this is essentially the shaded base coat version of the blanket. Go one step lighter. And we're not worried about precision here. We're just saying, okay, that's going to be my lightest light. So again, the idea here is not to kind of go from black to white. What this is about is kind of starting towards the middle, working all the way up into these lighter colors, and then using our transparent glazes to shade everything. It's just, trust me, it'll be more fun. So I'm going to do, I mix the green in with the khaki. I'm going to do some of this down here. I just really want to get some nice, let's do a little bit in. I was just assuming this was some kind of whatever is left of the horse's mane. First I thought maybe it was supposed to be some kind of flames coming off of the, and I realized no, it's probably just whatever is left of the horse's hair. So I'm gonna use a little bit of the brown. Throw in some of the yellow and the hit the top of the hip here. Let's throw some of the brown rose back out there. Every so often, you'll have to kind of replenish your paint. There we go. Now at this point I'm still just using the my slightly beat up number 8 round. Again, I'm doing this thing where I'm kind of transitioning these two colors together on the palette, because if I can see it here first, gives me a better idea of what's going to end up on the miniature. See, now I can take this lighter version. See, I'm starting to move up. I'm going to move up on the fair a little bit. Not too much. I want to get into this. I want to still keep things relatively loose. I think the ribs need a little bit of, there we go. Some of the neck. Jaw. As I've said a few times before, I'm not letting myself get bogged down into one area. Making sure to just go from one part of this to the next. And I'm not going to worry. There's a little brush mark here and there. Well, that's okay. Because once we start doing all of our transparent shades and washes and glazes, that'll long be a distant memory. Let's get back to some of this green. Let's hit some of these rib bones again. So while I call this a base coat, you can see a fair amount of the work is already being done. It was the best term that I could think of. It was not too many syllables, somewhat catchy. And that's why there's a whole video just dedicated to the topic of shaded base coat. Because it's just that important. See, so I just kind of dove into that pinkish color again. Every so often, just trying out something new. Okay, so here's an even brighter green. Now let's see what happens when we take some of the verdigris, throw that in there. You can see just in this one leg, and how it transitions kind of from that pinkish color down into something that's yellow and pink, all the way down into green, into this kind of sea foam. So that's just one leg. All of this action going on. And the whole principle behind that is, well, if this was all just bleach bone, brown wash, people walk up to it and they go, okay, bleach bone, brown wash, and walk away. This, they're going to look at this and they say, wait a minute, there's some yellows here, some blues, almost kind of an orange, a tan, almost looks like purple. Whole idea. See how this leg has all one leg, all these different colors. Same thing for the skeleton that's riding it. It's all about making this more interesting. If it's not interesting, people get bored and they'll find something else that's more interesting to look at. And that's why I try to keep as many colors out on the palette as I can, and not just say, well, now I'm just going to do the yellow part, now I'm just going to do the red part. Because what will happen is you'll get locked in on one color, one area. See here, this is almost it's like a gray here. Contrast to the yellow, which transitions into some red on the other side. So even from one side of a leg to another, the color is changing a little bit. So I'll set the horse aside for a while, let him be, and see what kind of stuff we can add to this rider. I'll take this blade here, it's on this top edge, just do that much. Top edge of the shield here. Along this edge. Get rid of some of the extra paint. A little bit there. I don't have to do too much more to him either. We're approaching the point where we say, okay, that's enough shaded base coat. Pretty soon it's gonna be time to do actual genuine shading. I just want to make sure there's enough light to show off that shading and get a little brighter here. You can see I haven't even put the ivory out on the palette yet. Did that on purpose. It's another one of those things that forces me to not get too much into detail too quickly. Alright, so at this point, I think I've got about just as much in the way of light as I can put on him. A little shot on the shoulder there. Maybe, let's see if there's a few more little bright things we can put on the horse before we let that kind of just settle down, let it dries, and then do the rest of this work. And we'll review before we start painting some of what some of the washes will do, what some of the colors are. So I think we're going to stop right about here. As we enter the next phase of the miniature, I'm going to throw out some new colors. Got some washes here. These are from Secret Weapon. We've got Heavy Body Black, Sewer Water, everybody's favorite Baby Poop. Kind of Vallejo wash out here. This is kind of a sepia shade. I've even thrown out this one, Algae, to not just tint the green darker, but also some of the other areas of the bone where we want it to be more grayish. So I'm going to move these aside, and I've got them out on the palette here. And I've got a few of these kind of beat up liner brushes you can see here on the ferrule. That's all kind of wash that's accumulated there. So what we'll do, we'll set some of this out here. Some of the heavy body. And again, don't be afraid to mix these together. Yeah, I like to have some kind of setup ready to go. So I'm going to just start to pick an area. Like that. And you can see there's some areas I'm not even going to touch. Like this part of the jaw, I'm not really going to mess with that because, well, I want it to be light. So right off the bat, you've got some nice shading that's going on here. We haven't lost our highlights, so we're not going to have to go back and put that in. That is the whole point. So let's turn this around. So you can see we don't have the deepest darks here. But now we've got some nice darks on this side. Let's take some of this and we'll work on the mane. And if you feel okay that's too much, you can dab away at it with a paper towel. You can brush it away with your finger. So again, what we started with, what we've got now. And we're going to walk our way around the miniature just like we did with our shaded base coat. Now here I'm going to grab some of this sepia. And what the shoulder is brought out that part of the harness. The technical term for this is painting in the negative space. It's making this lighter by making what's behind it darker. I know that's going to be kind of a alien thing for most people. What the heck is he talking about? It's the space that's not there. And I painted the space that's not there by painting everything else around it. And you'll see me just kind of reach from one wash to the next. You can take your brush, and if you feel there's too much somewhere, get rid of it. I do that all the time intentionally. It's right away. Just look at what we've done in this little section right here versus everything else around it. And when you're doing something like this painting bone, a technique like this really, it's a lot of fun. It's gonna make your life a little bit easier on projects like this. Because can you imagine if we just took this thing and took one simple brown wash and just threw it over the whole thing? Not gonna have much going on. Here we've already, like here on the end of the tail, well maybe I don't want that light, maybe I want that to be darker. Here where the tail meets the hip and pelvis, darker, back to a little bit more light. So just like we did up here on this shoulder, kind of painting that negative space around the harness. All the while trying to be conscious, getting variations wherever I can. Doing this every so often, just taking my finger, pulling that away. And one of the reasons I like to put it on a little pedestal like this is I can turn it upside down. And this lets me get my shadow in there. So where the green is, this is where the algae is going to go. Pull some away. And I'm kind of leaving this alone for right now, because you can see I'm working fast. What I don't want to do is have some accidental situations where the color bleeds somewhere. There are times where I want that to happen, and I'll set that up, but it's not really what I want here. I don't want to lose, like what I've got here. I don't want to lose that. Every so often, so I'm going to take some of this, and I'm going to water it down. You can do that with the washes. You can do it with GW ones, you can do it with Vallejo ones. So we're going to transition this from that greenish gray. And maybe I want most of this to just be darker. So I'm going to go to the other side of the leg. Finish that off, go back into that watered down algae. Pick away some of the lights. So again, just thinking about color transitions, create as much interest as I can. Now here we've got a knee bone where there's all those nice little subtle bones they put in. Let's make sure we don't lose those. But yet by putting in the dark, we brought those out a little more. Again, you can use your finger, you can use the towel to dab some of that away. You can use your brush, take some away. I want to forget about the skulls on the ground. Some of the bottoms of the legs here. Don't want to forget those. You have the other skull here. Put that down. Wipe some of it away. So what we've done is we've got this all set up for some highlights in the end. Maybe a few little middle tones here and there, but it's pretty well set up for some highlights now. Just like we did on the other side, we're gonna paint what's in the background to bring the foreground. That. Here. Some of the neck bones. Let's make sure we don't lose all of our lights. Gonna go back into that greenish color, work our way into the black. Make sure we don't lose all the lights. So now we've got some more work on this side of the jaw to do. I'll make this side a little bit darker and end it over here. Which means it's time to grab some of that heavy body black and put in some nice healthy shadows there. The underside of this, we need some shadow work done. So let's water down a little bit of the black and do a bit of shading on the armor. We're not going to focus on armor and saddles and all that because this is supposed to be a painting bone, so we don't want to lose sight of that. I'm not going to get terribly occupied with the lights and darks in that saddle because, well, that's where the miniature is going to sit. Back to the green. Pull away some of the lights. working my way one leg to the next, pulling away, adding, subtracting. To me, it's just more fun to work this way instead of laboring to start black and march your way all the way up to these light colors. Well, why not kind of start with the lighter colors and make things actually you could see. Let's compare him to skeleton. So I'm going to do the same thing with him. Now, not long from now, I'm going to set the horse aside so that I can do this work on the rider as well. The other thing to consider with this method is it's not just one layer of transparent shading or glazing. You can do it in layer after layer. So I'm going to add some more because I wanted this to be a little darker. Now, of course, it's better to wait before you say add more. Remember how light this was, and look at how dark it is now. So you can see I'm starting to add even more. So I'm letting these parts of the ribs be lighter, adding more shadow underneath the shoulder blade and that part of the harness. Okay, so let's set him aside. Let's get some action on the rider. Gonna hit the shield. Throw out some more of the sepia here. Just like I did, horse, gonna make sure I don't lock into one shading color. I want to get transitions. I'm gonna wipe away areas. Gonna water some of it down, do his skull, get some sepia in here. And wipe away. Thinking about shadow areas, maybe a little bit of green gets into the rib cage. Now I don't want to lose too much of that light. So I've watered it down, wiping it away, just like I did on the horse. So what we're going to do is shade underneath this elbow joint. Trying to keep as much of my lights as I can, but still thinking about, okay, I want that to be dark. And sort of think about, well, how would the bones, I guess, as they age and stain, maybe they would stain more on the ends. Maybe they would stain more in the middle. So let's try to work this so that the middle caught some of the dark. Let's get this other leg. I'm going to work some into here, make sure that's got some shading. You probably can't even see it. Just trust me, it's there. Now let's do the hilt of the lance. Sorry for bumping the camera. So I'm trying to work fast here. So what I want to do is take my hand and wipe away some of this. Now we're going to go over this, and you can reinforce the wood grain a little bit. Later on, what I'm going to do is take that black and just hit the underside of that. Now this even works if, say you're using metallic paints. This would still work just fine for that also. And see what happened here. What we did was we kind of reinforced light coming down this way. Do the same thing on the other side. Like so. Take some water. Take some of it away. Now some of the areas around here, you can see by this, there was some rust added there. I just figured he's undead. He's probably gonna have a rusty weapon. So I'll just let that stand for right now. Let's put just a little bit of this on the shield. Some of the black. Again, the beauty of this, if I just let this kind of do its own thing, now it's starting to look a little bit stained. So that's about as much time as I have to show you on shading. So what I'm going to do is dry this off, and then we'll get into working into the middle tones and establishing our final highlights. So here's where things get kind of fun. We're not already having fun. This is where we take some of our glaze colors and start to mix in that tan, that khaki. Look what happens when I mix some of the sepia in with this. A whole different color. And let's try some of that on one of the skulls. Let's try it on some of the leg bones here. The ribs. So you can see I used my washes and glazes to darken things down, but I can also use those to tint regular paint colors. I know most people don't really consider mixing paint with their washes, glazes, but I do that all the time, and it's really fun. It's also a quick way to modify some of your colors. Let's just do a little bit of that, so we just kind of relieving this lighter area alone. Let's shift to the other side. Let's see what happens when we mix this with, I think this is the sewer water. So again, we mixed regular paint with it. We're just going to do some painting with that. We're trying to go after, see if that got too dark. Well, let's so that's what I'm trying to do is now we're going to start to think about our light colors, and I'm trying to keep those subtle by mixing with my regular paint. Sorry if that was off camera. Again, working my way around. I want this to be lighter. Maybe even a little lighter. So it's your bone colors can go as light as you want. If you want this to be very dark and stained, like it's just been pulled out of the ground, well, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Do the same thing with the green. So what I've essentially done is kind of create a new palette here. And now I'm going to go after some of these little bones in the leg. Got the skull here. Let's pick out a few things on that skull. On this leg, see the leg we had tinted this green. Now let's continue that. Yet see how we can just work with all these colors almost simultaneously. And again, just like I did with my shaded base coat part, just like I did with the glazing, I'm trying to work on all areas of this at once. Top of the saddle. Let's do some of these rib bones here. Do some of these tail bones, but let's grab some of the sepia and some yellow. You could also use your liner brush. I'm just not quite there yet. I want to keep working as loose as possible for a while yet. Keep spinning this around. Let's work on some of these ribs here. The saddle. Pelvis. To the jaw, and just gonna fly around the miniature. Here's some green. The skull. I think this one's gonna have some more light on it. We even got some of the verdigris. So slowly. This is all more about adding lights now. We're not doing a lot of subtracting at this point. It's more adding. And all the while making sure that every so often I switch up my color. So there I just added some more of the sepia. Change this around. Let's take some of the yellow. Let's mix it in with the black. So that gives us a gray. Well, this needs a little gray. Now on the top there. Even throw some in on the saddle, even though the saddle is going to mostly be, again, covered by the miniature. Just throw a little bit on there. Let's use some of that gray on these straps of the harness. Again, wipe away what you don't want. The leg pretty much, well, the leg's going to be glued to that spot, so I'm not going to be terribly interested in getting details there. I'm going to reach into some verdigris. Pick out a few lights. So you can see I've done is, again, trying to preserve some of the warmer colors that I've got, but now transitioning into a few of these much lighter, cool colors, just in a few select places. Not too much, just a few. I hit a few parts of the saddle blanket here. I just mixed some yellow in with the green wash. So let's not forget that we've got a rider that goes with this. So let's set him aside. Grab this rider and we'll do some of the same stuff to him. So some of these leg bones go into the light. And kind of blend that together. So we've got his knee here. Let's make sure we've got enough light. Let's make sure you can see this. But not letting that get too light too fast. some cases I'm mixing more of the wash than I am the paint. You can see that these washes in glaze cover, they tend to stay wet for a while out on the palette. To me, that's another plus. I really like that. So let's do something here on the shoulder. Let's I think that's the baby poop. Let's go in shoulder here, and the elbow. Let's bring that out. And that's why it's dark here on the lance. To think about the skull here. Don't be afraid to wipe any excess off on your thumb. Let's use some of the flesh color there. Every so often my finger's gonna kind of get in the way here and it might make that blurry. So I'm gonna back away. Gonna go into the verdigris here. Okay. Grab some of the verdigris. Just a few lights on. End of the lance. There it is. Some of the baby poop on the digits of the feet here. I want those to kind of be dark and stained. So let's just leave that go. At this point, what I'm actually going to do is I might just glue him onto the horse so I can see how this whole thing works together, and then we'll do some final details from there. Now I'm going to do some finishing details here. What I did was, as this was drying, I also looked in the magnifier light to try and get a glimpse of, okay, you know, what details did I need to enhance, bring out. And I did a few things in the magnifier that I just can't see under these circumstances, and that was I did some work here on the teeth. here. Did a little work on the lance. Again, this is about painting bone, not about lances and horse blankets and all that. So I did some of that stuff off camera. It was important, though, to do some of that, just for you to see these final details, because again, it's all, as soon as I do this last little dark on the shield, it's all about making these things relate to each other. I'm not going to do the rust on the blade, because again, this is not about non-metallic metal. It's all about the bone. And you can see I'm taking that brown liner, and just where I think I need to have some really nice darks. That's what that's for. So maybe here underneath the jawbone and underneath the armor plate there. Maybe here on this knee bone, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to go both ways with that. Actually got out here is that ivory color, and with baby poop nearby, what I'm going to do is bring out a few highlights on those bones, a few on this. Just a few here and there. Some on the armor, on this elbow. Just the places that the light would catch the most on the top of, especially here on these brow ridges. On the top of the shield. Right along here. Let's go to the other side of the horse's head. Catch a few lights here. On the eye socket, on the jaw. As you can see, I've saved my lightest light color until literally the very, very end. Do a few of these teeth. On the skeleton itself. A little bit on that stirrup. You can see this. I'm going to try and do a couple of the last few digits on the toes. Back to the horse. A few hints on the tail. This hip bone should really catch some light as well. On the shoulder blades here, let's get some on this shoulder. You've got the skeletons on the, or the skulls on the ground. That's just a few. Just a couple. So you can bring out these lights as much as you want. I still have that wash. I can go in and maybe put a few highlights on this mane. We're going the other direction and take the brown wash and throw in some darks. It's all about this contrast of shading. I want this to be a little more round. This seems to be too bright here. I'm going to knock that down. So what I'm doing is just I'm checking to see how everything kind of one thing relates to another, color-wise, value-wise. See, this needs a little more shading to make it. There we go. I'm just doing this all around. Maybe these, maybe down here I want a little more definition. I don't want it to be quite so stained. So again, we've kind of worked our way all around the miniature. And that should give you a pretty good idea of how to get some successful appearing bone.
is where that all your fun gets had. The game you play, you'll dance the night away, laughing as you go to stalk your prey. The fancy dress and you're knocking